49ers general manager John Lynch was at the podium at the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine, talking about a number of subjects, actually not that much about the NFL draft, a lot of it about the current football team. Brock Purdy negotiations, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk trades potentially, talking with other teams and in-house free agents, all that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love and appreciate all the everydayers out there. Hit that thumbs up. Let us know you stopped by. And if you're new to the program, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts and hang out with us every day as we break down free agency, the draft, of course, and get ready for the 2025 NFL season every single day as we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Croc, John Lynch spilling some beans, keeping some beans in the jar as well, not trying to let everybody know everything that's going on with the San Francisco 49ers, and had some interesting quotes, and I think even told us a little bit more between the lines as it pertains to some of the players. To be honest with you, maybe the Deebo and Aiyuk stuff in particular, the most interesting, because I thought it would have been a much shorter and a much different answer when he was asked about if teams have been calling about Brandon Aiyuk. We got to start with the most important position on the football field for any football team. That is quarterback, Brock Purdy. And it probably comes as no shock that negotiations have started between the 49ers and Brock Purdy. And I'm going to go to the transcript here for some of the quotes because I don't want to get it wrong. I think the most interesting phrase, Croc, from John Lynch's answer about how Brock Purdy negotiations are going. He said, "We have started negotiations. We're talking. I won't go into negotiations like always is our stance. I want Brock to be our quarterback as long as we're here and beyond, and we'll leave it at that." I think the final thing, there are no guarantees that we get something done, but in my experience has been when both sides are motivated, there's ample opportunity to do so, and we've been able to do that. No guarantee.
Yeah. Like, okay, so here's my thing. I always go back to this because we've heard them, the contracts, and we still no guarantees. I think you and I, we've talked about this from the jump. We fully expect this deal to get done. So he says no guarantees, but we expect that deal is going to be done. I will say his tone on that, similar kind of to the Aiyuk situation, and a couple other ones, not similar to Nick Bosa. Like when it came to Nick Bosa, it was he ain't going nowhere. Deal's going to get done, like no doubt about it.
Don't bother calling about trades. Guys,
yeah. And Aiyuk, he was almost gone. So he kind of came across no guarantees. We'll see. He's a guy. We want him to be a 49er long term. And eventually they got it done, but they were minutes away from trading him away. So that window for trading him, it was truly there. And they gave him permission to be traded. With Brock Purdy, I don't foresee that happening. But for him to say there's no guarantees on your quarterback, is he saying that there's no guarantees to get it done right now before he plays the fourth year? Or is he just saying in general, like, we want to get it done, but we'll see. Like, what's your read on that?
I think he just knows how these things go. Like, this is telling me this is a summertime thing. This isn't a spring thing. This isn't a March contract that's going to get done. They're not going to get this done before free agency. This is going to be a tough contract. There's going to be an insane amount of money involved here, much more than the 49ers have ever divvied up. And those kind of contracts, you start adding pages and pages and pages and pages, and there's fine print, and there's language, and there's bonus structure. And I think even if you knew exactly what the final number was, I think it's still hard to hammer out all the details of how a contract like this is going to look. And maybe there's you just kind of have to haggle over every bit of the structure here. So if these other contracts were that difficult, this could be twice as difficult, really, and they might be even further apart in some aspects of how much they want to throw out there, how much they want to spend on Brock Purdy, how much he wants, what the agent wants, what they want for structure, years, length, guarantees. There's a lot that goes into this. No guarantees that we get something done is very interesting. I think that we expect something to get done, and he does say that there's ample opportunity to do so, and we've been able to do that. But sometimes that's late August, right? Sometimes that's like you're bearing down on September 1st and a contract isn't done yet. You hope this isn't one of those because it's more difficult with the quarterback to get ready for the season if your quarterback's not practicing than if like one defensive player or maybe one of the wide receivers isn't practicing or even one offensive lineman. If the quarterback is not practicing at training camp, that's a problem. So buckle up. I mean, that's the way I read this from John Lynch is buckle up. And if Purdy's people have a number that the Niners aren't comfortable with, this is going to take a while.
My issue with that is, and maybe I'm wrong, this is something that happened with the Lamar Jackson situation, but for most of the quarterbacks, when your team likes you and they love you, which the 49ers, I believe they like him. Now, I mean, but you kind of have to question to what extent, because most of these other quarterbacks, they don't go through that. Like when Trevor Lawrence was up for a new contract and got his deal, did we hear about anything about it? Like, it was just something, it got done. When Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, when they're up for contracts, when they need to kind of, restructure something to fit the team, whatever, but it just gets done. So why is it that Brock Purdy, who is your guy, why can't you just, why does it have to be so difficult? Like you said, oh man, it's going to be kind of difficult. There's a lot of different, why is it so difficult when it's not difficult for these other teams that want and need to pay their quarterbacks? They just get it done.
Some of them were difficult. Some of them were like there was holdouts or threats of holdouts. The Tua one comes to mind, and the Dak Prescott deal comes to mind. And those
I don't think they wanted to pay Tua, and I don't think they wanted to pay Dak Prescott.
What they got and what they ended up getting was numbers that I think may make me uncomfortable, and I'm not even writing the checks, and I don't even care anything about the Dolphins or the Cowboys, right? And that makes me uncomfortable with how much money they got over there. And those are going to be the comps for Brock Purdy. So it's going to get to an uncomfortable level, and the 49ers don't like that, and they're tough negotiators. So again, this could be a tough one, and it could be a little bit difficult. The one thing with, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody look it up, and I'm sure we'll hear about it. I'm pretty sure Trevor Lawrence's deal was done with 2 years left on it because he's got the 5th-year option for first-round quarterbacks. And so after year 3, just like Brock Purdy right now, after year 3 is when they did that contract. So there was still 2 more years to go. So that one got done a lot earlier. So that's kind of the big difference between and why the structure is different and why they're able to spread out the money a little bit different with the Trevor Lawrence contract versus the Tua contract and versus the, some other contracts where guys are going into the final year of their contracts. And for Brock Purdy, all those guys were already making a lot of money before. Brock Purdy's an entirely different animal because how underpaid he's been, and he had a 7th-round contract rather than a 1st-round contract, or Dak Prescott was already coming off a veteran contract when he signed his latest deal.
No, okay, so Dak Prescott, he was a 4th-round pick. What happened with him was he played his 4 years. They couldn't agree on a contract. So then he had to, they franchise tagged him.
Yeah.
And then he snapped his ankle on the franchise tag. But he was kind of lighting it up, at least, yardage wise, like all those things. He was kind of lighting it up. And it was like, oh man, all right. And then the price went up. I just saw that with the Cincinnati Bengals and Jamar Chase. They haven't paid him yet. Remember, Jamar Chase held out last year. And eventually he was like, all right, like I'll come back. He came back and caught for 1,700 yards, broke every Cincinnati record. So now the price is exponentially higher. And I think that's what happened with Dak Prescott, where, it's like, well, we don't feel comfortable paying him. So let's franchise, or we're going to have a franchise tag him or have him play on that 4th year. He played on the 4th year, went crazy. Then you franchise tag him, he snaps his ankle. Now it's like, well, we kind of owe it to pay him to take care of him. So that was a different situation. But initially, they did not want to pay him. So with Brock Purdy, I just keep coming back to this. If Brock Purdy is to this team what the fan base believes he is and what we believe he is to this team, why is it so difficult to just get this taken care of without all the extra stuff?
I mean, you could ask the same thing about any of the guys that have had tough negotiations and holdouts, because it seemed like it would have been an easier contract to do the Nick Bosa one. And even that took to all the way to the end of a training camp to get that done. And by the way, Jamar Chase, that's a good example. Listen to what Duke Tobin, I believe it's Duke Tobin, the GM of the Cincinnati Bengals. Listen to his comments about Jamar Chase and getting a deal done. And it sounds a lot more like how John Lynch sounded about Nick Bosa. And there's a report that basically they're going to sign him. He's going to get a lot of money and it's going to get done and it's going to be huge and they're ready for it. And it's going to be even more than Bosa's contract. It's going to be the biggest non-quarterback contract in the history of the NFL. And that's coming. And then basically the GM was like, yep, that's what's going to happen. And we're going to do that. So different answers. And so go listen to that part of the Combine press conferences if you want to hear how teams talk about different players and different GMs talk about different players. And even John Lynch talking about his own players a little bit differently and had some different answers for everybody. And it sounded different with Bosa. It sounds different with Purdy. Definitely sounds different with Deebo and Brandon Aiyuk. We're going to talk about them. Brian Griese is now no longer a coach for the San Francisco 49ers and a whole lot more next. Let's finish up the quarterback portion of this podcast. Quarterback coach Brian Griese is stepping away not only from the 49ers, but stepping away from coaching entirely, which is really interesting because Brian Griese could have been like one of the hottest, fastest rising coaches, in my opinion, in the NFL. And he actually was already getting head coach interview requests this offseason. And he turned down a head coach interview with the New York Jets this offseason. And instead, Brian Griese is going to step away from not only the 49ers, but step away from coaching altogether. So the 49ers had to add a new quarterbacks coach, and that is Mick Lombardi, who is the son of Michael Lombardi. And he was a former coach for the 49ers when he got his start in the NFL as well a few years back. And then Clay Kubiak has now officially been promoted to offensive coordinator for the 49ers, which was a deal we already knew was going to get done. The 49ers tried to do that a little too quickly, had to interview some other folks. And so that is done now. Clay Kubiak, offensive coordinator, much like Mike McDaniel was, not calling plays. Kyle Shanahan's still the play caller, although Clay might get some of those preseason games he gets to call, which I'm sure is fun. Mick Lombardi, new quarterbacks coach, replacing Brian Griese. And if all those last names aren't familiar enough, how about another hire that was added to it to finish the coaching staff? Jake Lynch, John Lynch's son, is now quality control coach, getting his first job, I believe, in the NFL for the San Francisco 49ers there. So, Croc, how do you get a job in the NFL? Be related to somebody who's already in the NFL.
I think that definitely helps. I saw your tweet saying this is the most nepotism tweet I've ever seen in my life.
It's pretty insane. Kyle Shanahan, son of a coach, hires Kubiak, son of a coach. Kubiak worked for Mike Shanahan. Gary Kubiak hires Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan now returns the favor, hires Gary Kubiak's son to be the both of Kubiak's sons on the 49ers staff at one point. Now offensive coordinator Clay Kubiak and Jake Lynch, I'm sure is, yeah. Can we be honest for a second though? You know, there's the Rooney Rule, which this is why it exists, right? I think the Rooney Rule is like for, head coach and coordinators and stuff. And it's an important rule and could even be expanded or improved somewhat. And I don't know the answers to that, but I think there needs to be a rule for the other side of the hirings, for the first hires in the NFL, because that's where these guys get, like Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan deserves to be a head coach in the NFL because of the resume he built and how good of a coach he is, right? But did he deserve to be John Gruden's quality control coach the day he graduated college? I don't know. That foot in the door is way more difficult. And it's that step, the hiring of somebody's kid or your kid, or, the nepotism in the NFL. It's the old boys network. It's still no different. Getting your foot in the door, getting the first job to start building your resume. I think we got to do something about that and have a Rooney Rule on the front side and not just on the back side when you're hiring the guys that are the finished products with their resume, because it's so hard to get a job in the league as it is, and so hard to build that resume to get to the point where you even could have a head coach or a coordinator interview.
Yeah, I mean, shoes. I'm not sure if you remember this conversation, but I was super heavy into the draft content in 2018, 19, 20, and in 2020, the Atlanta Falcons actually reached out to me and had me submit a resume to potentially be an assistant. What they call it, assistant scout. It's kind of you do all the grunt work and everything for them.
Yeah.
And, they went in a different direction, but it is extremely difficult, even for someone like me. I mean, I was all in on it. I'm watching all these prospects. I'm breaking them down detailed. I took the scouting academy. I did all that. It's like, man, I feel like I'm doing everything possible. I have a background in sports and relationships with guys. Like, maybe this will kind of help me. It ain't helped me enough. So for the guys like me that do have a big time passion, I think now more than ever, you can at least kind of, scratch that itch a little bit doing social media stuff, maybe getting hired from some of these networks. But if your ultimate goal is to play in the NFL, to coach in the NFL, or to be a scout in the NFL, or do any of those things, I think for some, it's a little bit more difficult for sure, just to get, like you said, that foot in the door.
Yeah. You want to work in the league? Know somebody, network. You got to go somewhere, and if you're not related to somebody, go meet somebody and go work somewhere for free, and hopefully that person you work for gets a better job and takes you along with them. Like that. That's the way to get into the NFL. No,
Brian Greasy, you mentioned him, which maybe there was a little bit of nepotism there as well, right? Like, his dad. He played for Shanahan, and obviously you got Kyle Shanahan and that whole thing. But I bet for him stepping away, because I think there are some people I saw, people trying to make it a little bit more than what it is. Oh, trouble in paradise. What's going on with the 49ers? Like, who just steps away? This was a guy that shut down in the interview for a head coaching job with the New York Jets. And then now all of a sudden he steps away. So does that mean he didn't want that interview because he was content with where he was at? Or I feel like all along, maybe he just doesn't want to coach anymore. And there's a lot that goes into coaching. There's a lot of long days. And I think that was a question even when he took the quarterback coaching job with the 49ers. He was in media. He was in the TV. And, there's good money in TV, a lot more flexibility. You don't have to do as much work, not as much long days as there with coaching and dealing with different personalities and not being at the top, not being able to spend as much time with your family, having to uproot and be somewhere else. So, I think he did it for, 2-3 years or however long it was. Said, you know what, it was fun while it lasted, but maybe coaching is just not for me. And that's what I took from it. But I would love to hear later if something comes out where maybe, there were just some strong personalities that didn't mesh or something like that. But I bet it was just, man, coaching, it's a lot of long hours and you got to really love it. And I think I scratched that itch, but let me go back to TV.
And John Lynch did say that Brian Greasy gave them a 3-year, like he said, I'll give you 3 years for sure. And it was 3 years. And he's like, no, I'm dipping out. So that's kind of, I think, what happened. And dude, just anecdotally looking at interviews when Brian Greasy spoke, and quarterback coaches don't speak very often, but when Brian Greasy would speak to media, he looked like he was having the worst time possible. Like he looked just beat and not happy to be there. And so just based on that, and who knows, but based on that, I'm not super surprised. He's like, yeah, this is not for me. And what's funny is, like, you would understand if a coach was like that if they weren't in media. But Brian Greasy's been in front of the cameras, since he was in college, and obviously had a TV job. So being in front of media isn't something that should be difficult for him, but he was like not having it. It looked like he was just completely miserable in some of these, in these media sessions. So yeah, Brian Greasy is stepping away. Mick Lombardi, new quarterback coach for the 49ers. A couple quick notes before we get to the wide receivers, Deebo and Aiyuk, and the trade conversations that have happened there. Trent Williams, quote, Trent is playing this year, according to John Lynch. And so we get at least one more year from Trent, and he's healthy and he's ready to go as of now. So that's Trent Williams. It's going to go year by year there. Will it affect the 49ers, knowing that they don't have to replace an offensive tackle this offseason? They have their starters coming back. Will that change how they draft, or do they want to get a starter ready for next year potentially to replace McKivitz and or Trent Williams if the need is there? Christian McCaffrey was asked, this is another interesting one where you kind of was like, okay, he was asked if Christian McCaffrey will be ready for the offseason program. And Lynch said, I hope so. Parts of it. Let me give you the full transcript of that one. So you tell me what you think about this answer when asked about Christian McCaffrey. And let me see if I can find it. I won't lose it. Yeah. How's Christian McCaffrey doing from the health standpoint? He's doing great. Yeah, Christian's doing really well. And I think was real frustrated with the way last season went and doing everything that is possible. And as he did in preparation for last year. And we're hoping CMC is out there going to have a tremendous year. If he is healthy, he will have a tremendous year. That's just what he does. Is he expected to be ready for the offseason program? Quote, I think so. I think at least parts of it. We'll be judicious and follow the medical folks' advice and so on and so forth. So that's where Christian McCaffrey is. So I don't expect to see much of him on the field and a lot of days off. And you hope that leads to him being healthy and ready to go in week 1. So probably a lot of days off for Christian McCaffrey and not a lot of work in the voluntary or the mandatory portions of the offseason. That's the way I read that one. So kind of cross your fingers and hope he's healthy for camp and for the start of the season.
So in a situation like that, do you just say, you know what, we like the backups, right? We drafted a running back last year that can scoot, and we saw him, do well. We like Jordan Mason when he was healthy, he ran well, and do you just move forward with them, or do you say maybe we should start truly looking for a replacement to Christian McCaffrey?
And look, Jordan Mason is on. He's a restricted free agent, so we'll see what round tender they give him, and I'm sure they'll tender him in some sort of way. But Grendo to me is more of a backup player and sort of change of pace guy. Could do a lot, can give you some out of the backfield as a receiver as well. But so right now, expectation should be that you're kind of okay this year. You expect Christian McCaffrey to be ready. You should add somebody in the draft in the late rounds for sure to complete the group. But if you asked yourself, who's the starting running back in 2027? That player might not be on the roster. So how heavily do you look at that and you think, okay, shoot, if the right guy's there in round 2 or round 3, do we pull that trigger knowing that we don't know how long Christian McCaffrey's going to be around? We're not guaranteed that he's going to be back in 100% by draft. On draft day, they won't know that answer quite yet, but it sounds like they expect him to be back. I round 4 through 7, day 3. Draft a running back. That's the way I would do it. I'd probably do that just about every single year, and you'll be fine at running back. How does Kyle Shanahan feel about it? I'm not sure.
My thoughts on it is, because I kind of like the way the 49ers went about things prior. Like, I don't agree with just investing in third-round running backs and stuff like that. Like, if it's a guy, okay, go get a guy.
Yeah.
But the bigger concern is, again, we continue to talk about what the team was in 2022, 2023. Guys that were playing at an extremely high level, or guys that were playing at a potential MVP level, which was Christian McCaffrey. And when you hear reports like this, it seems like you're just getting further and further away from having that kind of roster. When you hear, well, Trent Williams will be back for this year, or Christian McCaffrey, he'll be a part of stuff to some extent. It's just you're getting further and further away from that. So you got to be able to bridge that gap somehow. I guess it's got to be Brock Purdy to do it.
Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, 2 pretty impactful players that are free agents this offseason. And what did John Lynch say about a Deebo Samuel trade, and why are teams calling about Brandon Aiyuk next? So let's get into the wide receiver portion of this programming. And the question about... We'll start with Deebo Samuel because we know it's public and he has asked for a trade. John Lynch was asked, you said you're not interested in moving off from a good player. Since then, Deebo Samuel's requested a trade. What's the latest with him? John Lynch said, quote, still not interested, but along those lines of the financial constraints and some conversations we've had with Deebo, it's something. We've been forthright with that. We're on good terms with Deebo. He's asked for a fresh start, and I think we're going to honor that. I don't like seeing great players leave, and he is a great player. I think often one of my favorite draft picks in my time, he makes plays, and he makes game-changing plays, and everything's good. But I think at some point, time happens. He's asked for that. We don't always. There's contracts and things, but it probably makes sense. We're at least allowing him to look, and we're having conversations. We'll see where that goes. And he did say that there's numerous teams that have been interested and called about Deebo Samuel. So those conversations have happened. To me, that sounds a little bit like the Jimmy Garoppolo situation, Croc, where I just have a feeling that John Lynch isn't going to want to give Deebo away. And he's going to say, well, they're not offering enough, and it's best if you play for us. And I wonder if this is another one that could kind of go, draft comes and goes. And if he's not traded, soon, there's going to be that March 22nd date where there's a bonus that is due. And again, if he's not traded by that date, then maybe he gets cut. But why would you pay to lose Deebo Samuel? Why would you cut him? So I think that might play into why would you pay money to not have Deebo Samuel when you could just have Deebo Samuel if a team doesn't pay the price that you're looking for, especially with Brandon Aiyuk and the ACL thing and not knowing exactly where he's going to be. But there's an update, good news update on Brandon Aiyuk, by the way, from John Lynch. But the Deebo thing I think could play out more like the Jimmy Garoppolo, where there's talks, and we keep talking, oh, trade here. Is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Draft comes and goes. June 1st comes and goes. And Deebo Samuel is still on the 49ers.
I wonder if there's a way to fix this, right? My wife and I, you've been married, I've been married. I'm married going on 10. I've been married 10 years this November. And we have not yet, hopefully never. I mean, you never know what you have to do, but we haven't had to have marriage counseling.
She hasn't asked for a trade?
She has not asked for a trade. But if she does ask for a trade, I would assume that the first step is counseling, right? Trying to figure out, what am I doing wrong? What am I not seeing? Right? Looking in the mirror. And I wonder if there's a way for the 49ers, because it does not benefit them to just cut them. Like you said, it's like, why are we going to pay to cut you? Right? Like, okay, you want the fresh start. Cool, I get it. Is there a way to fix this before having to just 100% go to that resolution? Is there a way to where we can have our marriage counseling and maybe fix this and maybe get back on the same page? And again, I haven't had to go to counseling, so I don't know what that is like. Trying to, if you fall out of love with someone and they're not doing things, they're disgruntled, they want something else, they want a fresh start. And do you go and try to convince them that, no, this is what's best for you? I don't know. I haven't been in that position. Maybe some of our listeners, they can help me with that. But Deebo Samuel, it feels like it's more him than the Niners that want the fresh start. That's what it feels like. So if that's the case, do you say, all right, just you're gone? Or you say, nah, man, like, even aside from the financial stuff, whatever, if that's what you truly want, I'll let you go. But man, we feel like we're a better team with you. Deebo, how can we make this work? Yeah. Deebo, how can we fix this? Because his play last year was that of someone that maybe was a little disgruntled. Like, how was he there? Like, he was there physically. Was he really there mentally? And was that what we saw with some of the drop-offs and some of the drop plays and drop off in stats, some of the stats? He had some big games, a lot of bad games. Was he checked out in those games, right? Is there a way to get him mentally checked back in so that he can be the Deebo that we know he potentially can be? So can they go to counseling and fix this? And who has to go to counseling? Is it Deebo and Kyle? Is it Deebo and Kubiak or Deebo and Purdy? Like, who is it that needs to sit down and have this counseling so that, hey man, we got so much, like, let's get this fresh thing going. Let's get this fresh start going. Rekindle that spark that we once had in our eyes for one another.
How about this answer about Brandon Aiyuk? And we might have to have more conversations about this in shows upcoming, because this is a super interesting one. This is one where you speak about counseling and like where I would want to know what Sigmund Freud thinks about this answer. The question is there a health update on wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk? There was also a report from the Combine that teams are poking around interested in trading for him. Is there any interest? John Lynch's answer, quote, yeah, that typically happens with really good players. I remember, I think 2 years ago, having similar conversations. You get calls and you always listen to calls. I think since Kyle and I have been here, we've been certainly a top 5, I believe, number 2 cash spending team in the 4 years. Going into the 4th year, I think we're the 4th highest cash spending team. So at some point, you have to reset a little bit or at least recalibrate. You can't just keep pressing the pedal, and I think there's some good that could come out. We need to get younger. I think we're the oldest team in football trying to make a run at the deal last year, and I think it's good to constantly get younger. Our draft class last year was a great move towards that. We'll have 4 picks in the top 100. If the comp picks happen like we see it, that's always a calculation. We will have 10 picks overall, and we're excited about adding more youth to a great core of players that we already have.
That was his response to them asking about teams inquiring about Brandon Aiyuk.
Either he didn't understand the question, or I don't know what the hell to think about what the 49ers think about Brandon Aiyuk. How could you have possibly done the deal with him last year if the answer to, is there any truth? Yeah, that typically happens with really good players. And then talking about how you need to reset your roster. What the hell was that, Croc?
A few years ago, you and I, we talked about how sometimes John Lynch is just a little too honest with his thoughts, like what he's thinking in his head. And there's some things where it's like, maybe you shouldn't quite say that. And they would go on KBR and they would just give it these sound bites. And I'm like, I don't know if you're supposed to say that. Like, you say that to, your owner, or you say that to Kyle. I don't know if you tell that to all the people listening to KBR. That answer that he just gave, I think you can give that answer, but not to the question about Brandon Aiyuk.
It would have made sense about almost any other player. You just signed Brandon Aiyuk. It's $40 million in dead money if you trade him. Why would you sign him and instantly be talking trade? Why didn't you trade him last offseason if that's the case? And then maybe you don't have this thing with Deebo? I mean, do we start looking at McMillan and Luther Burden at pick 11 for the 49ers, right? Like, this is getting strange. We're going to have to dive a little bit deeper into this, Croc, because we're kind of out of time today. But, and I think I'm going to have to take some time to even wrap my brain around that
I'm
answer.
shocked at that answer.
That was much different. I thought the answer would be, first of all, much shorter. The first sentence, he says, that happens with good players. But we just signed him to a long-term deal, period. That's what I thought the answer would be. Brandon Aiyuk is available, is what I took from that, which blows my mind and makes me questions about the plan that the 49ers have right now. You trade Deebo and Brandon Aiyuk?
We've talked about it. They have no plan. That's wherever their plan is, it's like they write it down and then they just like erase it off the dry erase board. We're talking about some guys who traded to number 3, not knowing what player they wanted. Right the day of the draft, called to see if Aaron Rodgers was available. I don't even know how they were planning on getting or acquiring Aaron Rodgers, but this is a team, they have no plan. They just kind of go with the wind and, we'll just figure it out. And the crazy thing is, more times than not, it has worked. It hasn't worked in the sense of them winning a championship, but it works to where, they have four conference championship appearances.
Well, I don't think it's going to be the end of that conversation. We'll probably talk a little bit more. It's actually our off-season Q&A episode tomorrow. We're going to get into more prospects as well. We'll probably hit the prospects a lot harder after the weekend. We're going to see a lot of workouts, have some players that we watch that are splashing at the combine, as well as we build our big board for the 2025 NFL draft. And who knows who's even going to be on the roster for the 49ers by the time the draft comes. Get those questions in early. Join us live on YouTube if you want on Thursday as we do our off-season Q&A weekly episode. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and anywhere else you listen to this podcast. Croc and I back tomorrow right here. Locked On 49ers.